Hey, so everyone, is he good? Is he bad? How should we build him? Weapons, attack percent, or elemental mastery? There's so many questions. But first, hello you beautiful people, Aaron here, back to provide you with some heavy information on how to build Heizou. If you do like this type of content, please hit that like button down below and comment for the YouTube algorithm. And if you want to consistently see more of me, why not hit that subscribe button too? Helps me out so much, and you could always take it away if you decide you don't like me anymore. Anyways, let's get started. As you might know, Heizou is a main DPS, but he's different from other main DPS characters. He can output tremendous damage all by himself, but a good portion of his DPS potential is through swirling, similar to Sucrose. He has two main sources of damage, split between his normals and his skill, with his burst dealing pretty great damage too. His base attack is at 225, which is the same as Beidou and Zhongling. His normal attacks are really sick, as he taekwondos them taekwonhos to victory. However, the scaling is deceptive, as they do not look the best, but they actually end up making up a vast majority of his damage output. They have lower scaling than Venti's, and they are on a similar page to Albeido's though. Albedo does end up having a higher base attack stat than him too, oddly. Onto his skill. His skill is really crazy. He charges up a punch that can be released at any time, but while charging this punch, he gains stacks that increase the damage of the punch. He can have a max of 4 stacks, which will end up doubling the damage of this punch. On top of that, he gets another damage bonus when he reaches maximum stacks. This multiplier is absurd and has what I believe to be the highest single damage instance skill multiplier in the entire game. It also has a 10-second cooldown. His elemental burst has him kick a volley of wind in a direction. When it hits an enemy, it explodes, and if an enemy has an element on them, after a moment, another explosion will occur on up to 4 separate enemies. It then deals AoE damage of the elemental type it absorbs, similarly to an Albedo elemental burst, but with the extra absorption factor. This burst also has a short cooldown of only 12 seconds and a 40 energy cost too, so it's very spammable. His ascension passives are pretty great too. His first one grants him stacks for his skill whenever he procs a swirl reaction, which can be triggered only once every 0.1 seconds. This allows him to normal attack and output more damage instead of standing still in order to get the maximum amount of damage necessary for his punch. Ascension 4 is a mediocre buff that grants ADEM to all allies except himself after he uses his elemental skill. For constellations, his C1 grants him a temporary normal attack speed increase and 1 stack of a skill whenever he takes the field. It can occur only once every 10 seconds. His C2 grants his burst a suction effect. I haven't seen anything on how strong this pull is, so I will assume it has a Kazuha wind tunnel pull strength, aka the little vortex that appears after Kazuha uses his skill. C4 grants him 9 energy back when he uses his burst. The bursts that come after the initial one then regen 1.5 energy to him. C6 makes it so each stack for his skill also grants his skill an extra 4% crit rate. Then at max stacks, his skill grants 32% increased crit damage. Now that we know his kit, let's talk about how his weapons impact his damage. But before I get into his weapons and damage options, I need to tell you all the consistencies with my math going forward. For these weapons, I chose to go for a hyper investment. The base consistent stats are 71.1% crit rate, 205.5% crit damage, 750 attack, 115 elemental mastery, 113% energy recharge, and 85.6% anemo damage bonus. Heizou is running a full Viridescent set with 10-10-10 talents and is C6. This is maximum Heizou. For my calculations, I also did take into account resistances and defenses of enemies, but it's only a small amount. So in game, the numbers should be slightly less. If you are looking for anything specific or just want to skip to the end to know which weapon is best, all chapters are in the description below. Anyways, let's continue. For comparison's sake, for Heizou's damage, I want you all to keep these 3 characters in mind: Beidou, Itto, and Jean. All 3 of these characters deal immense damage with their single burst elemental skills, and I want to use them as comparison. Here are their numbers on screen. These are all also hyper invested and impossible to get. They are also built as efficiently as I could have made them, and I built them with dealing the most damage with their skill in mind. Order from lowest to highest is Jean's skill at almost 40k damage, Beidou with 84k damage on a full counter, and Itto with a grand old 90k damage for his dancing bull. Now to Heizou's damage. I tried to use every weapon that made sense with him, and with all details in mind. These are all weapons and the different states. All 5 stars are at refinement 1, and all 4 stars are at refinement 5 by default. There are certain notes by some names, like Kagura's Verity 1 stack and Kagura's Verity stacks. I did this because it is more likely to be at 1 stack for Kagura than at the unreasonable total of 3 because of the significant amount of time he would need to be on field. Similar situation with Solar Pearl's refinements. Not everyone will have the weapon at refinement 5, so I tried to take that into account as well. Witsith is a notoriously annoying weapon to calculate damage for because you need to do math for each of its passive effects, plus when there is no passive, so it is 4 weapons in one plus the average damage calculation. It's really just an annoying weapon, but these are all the numbers I got for each of the weapons for him. But this might be harder to read, so let's sort them in order from best to worst skill damage. There we go. Hope that makes it easier. Toward the top we have the Witsith twice. The weapon's kinda broken, huh? Then in third is the unreasonable Kagura's Verity at 3 stacks with Memory of Dust and Blackcliff Agate not so far behind, and all at 100,000 damage plus. Worst weapons in this regard would be the Witsith with its EM passive, Solar Pearl at R1, and then Dodoko Tails, all at 80,000 damage or less. But what about his burst damage? What changes? Let's resort, shall we? First thing I want to note is our biggest loser here, Kagura's Verity at 3 stacks. Cap went from 3rd place all the way down to 8th place. Tragic. The rest of the top spots kept their order, so let's see. Top 3 are, well, would you look at that? Witsith in the first 2 spots yet again. Whoa. Who saw that coming? I know I didn't. Then in third is the Memory of Dust with Blackcliff and R5 Solar Pearl as the runner-ups, all above 50,000 damage. Bottom of the barrel is again Witsith with its EM passive, then Mappa Mare and Dodoko Tails all floating around the 40,000 damage threshold. But what about putting the damage of the skills and burst together? Well, let's resort again, and it's very similar. Not much has changed at the high and low ends. Witsith is still the best and the worst weapon in regard, but that's only because we didn't include swirling into mix. What if we do? Swirling does make an impact as it makes the EM scaling weapons, Witsith and Mappa Mare, better. It also ignores defense and has quadratic scaling, making it scale really well in most cases. It is also very free-to-play friendly, as it only requires main stats and the Viridescent set to work, though it is a great option in case you only have EM artifacts somehow. Anyways, let's talk about swirling and its influence. For swirling, I'm assuming Heizou will proc the effect once every 3 hits. I would assume that about 3 full rotations for normal attacks would be enough for an entire rotation for him, so let's just say 8 procs there. Then for his bursts, we're going to count only 4 swirls here for each of the delayed bursts that will pop and not the initial damage, because I'm not gonna lie, I forgot. I'm sorry, I just completely forgot. I did all the math and I only realized right now as I'm writing this out. I'm not going back because I am so tired. Let's just call this the bare minimum. So there's going to be another 1 or 4 more swirls for the skill, because it will proc once for 1 enemy and 4 for 2. However, you may think why I would consider 2 enemies here instead of everyone else, and I legitimately have no clue. I was in the zone that day or drunk, I don't know. Let's just consider it a range, shall we? Range for swirls? That sounds good. And if it don't sound good to you, don't worry, in the end it doesn't matter anyway. Partial spoilers, I guess. Moving on. When we take into account the swirl damage for each weapon, we see that the Witsith and Mappa Mare have some dramatic shifts in damage output. Mappa Mare shifts from 13th to 12th place, Witsith average damage shifts from 10th place to 8th place, and the Witsith EM buff shifts it from 14th place, aka last place, all the way up to 6th place. A whopping 8 places. That's crazy. But it hasn't really shaken up anything else really. So how effective is EM at boosting Heizou's damage? Can it be better than crit? Let's compare using the Witsith and Mappa Mare, since they will be impacted by this the most, and will also be using the most consistently strong weapon Heizou has in his arsenal, the Memory of Dust. If we put the weapons right next to each other, we will find it's significantly worse. But what about if we put the ball in Swirl's court this time with a situation where multiple enemies are right next to each other? Then Swirls will probably be better, right? Well, let's try putting them right next to each other in this scenario, but without Witsith, because honest to god, that weapon is single-handedly giving me an aneurysm. In this situation with 2 enemies plus, swirling is significantly better than just raw damage. Surprisingly, Mappa Mare is even better at damage output than Memory of Dust. So, I did it. I succeeded. EM is better than full damage in the long run, right? Right? After I made this discovery, I started writing, but something didn't hold up well. What about Solar Pearl? Everyone was convinced that this weapon was going to be amazing compared to every other weapon, but my math shows it's it's gonna be kind of garbage. It also shows that you just shouldn't even try building anything but EM in the first place. So I decided to put the ball in Solar Pearl's court, and I calculated normal attack damage. Turns out normal attacks make up for a lot of Heizou's damage, point where there is no situation where damage is not just better. To be more exact, out of the 4 damage sources that he has, 1/3 of all his damage is normal attacks, another third is his skill, and the final third is his burst and swirling combined. So I decided to retest every weapon in the arsenal one last time. For these comparisons, I decided to completely supercharge these guys. Highest damage I could get and the best stats I could get for each weapon. I'll be testing his damage against 2 enemies for his normals and for his swirls. I also went back and changed my little formula for his swirls. He would swirl 8 times for his on-field time with his normals, once with his skill and once with his burst. But since there are 2 enemies, this one means that each swirl would hit 4 times. I also added 2 at the end because his burst is weird, and I don't know exactly how many times it is gonna swirl or if it will swirl for multiple enemies or whatnot. So it's basically an average of the second burst of damage from it. Anyways, this was a lot of math. So instead of having you look at numbers and fractions for too long, I'm going to get right into sorting them in order from most to least damage per on-field time. At the top, surprise, surprise, it's the Widsith's attack and elemental damage buff. Who could have guessed? What did actually surprise me was that the R5 Blackcliff Agate took the 3rd spot. But why? Well, it seems that the weapons that grant crazy stat boosts, like Widsith and Agate, are the weapons that have his normals deal more damage than his skill, whereas lower stat boosting weapons like Solar Pearl have his skill deal more damage, oddly. I think it's because his skill already has a lot of different damage boosting components to it, but I don't know, I'm just some dude. The lower ranking weapons would be Dodoko Tails in last, then Mappa Mare, and then the new addition to the list, Blackcliff Agate at R1. I added this weapon because of the R5 version's place at basically the #1 spot for Heizou. I wanted to add the R1 to see the range of the Blackcliff's power, and it ends up being extremely wide. Not only that, but it is really conditional with needing to have already killed some enemies, so the variance is even greater than just this. So what's Heizou's best weapon? Well, first, let's thin out this list by getting rid of the weapons that are specific or do not reach my average. This list will only have R5 4 stars and R1 5 stars. Blackcliff reigns supreme, but again has a conditional passive that relies on there being mobs to annihilate. The Memory of Dust in second place is in the same boat, as it requires a strong shielder on your team, but any elemental shielder to help Swirl like Diona or even Toma, since Heizou is a normal attacker, would be a great choice to slot with him for this weapon and for more chances of swirling. There's also Zhongli, who will be the most reliable Animo Shredder for him, but if you're looking for no conditions, Skyward Atlas is his best weapon without a doubt. I did also take into account the damage for the weapon's passive too for this list, so don't worry. Then there's the Solar Pearl at R5 and the Lost Prayer of the Sacred Winds. Finally, we have the free-to-play options, starting with the Widsith. If you're able to play around its cooldown, this weapon would actually skyrocket to being one of his best. But if you rotate normally, well, you're gonna have to feel that damage loss. But some damage is better than no damage, right? After Widsith, we have Mappa Mare, which is craftable and is the only free-to-play option he has. Then Dodoko Tails, which you would only have if you played the game last summer. To keep it simple, the all-around best option is Skyward Atlas. Then for 4 stars, it would be the Solar Pearl, and his best free-to-play option is going to be the Widsith. However, since artifact farming is hell, your first choice should always be a crit rate or crit damage weapon on him, since he scales mostly off of that. Remember, this Heizou is peak Heizou, so your experience and what you should go for will be different overall. Blackcliff Agate and Solar Pearl are the first 2 I would suggest, so if you can get one, you probably should. If you have neither, R1 Solar Pearl has the least difference in damage from the R5 counterpart, so if you can get the Battle Pass, you might want to. We also have yet to get a signature catalyst for Klee, who is rumored to be getting a rerun soon, and she also relies on her normal and charged attacks, plus her skill, so it might be worth just waiting until there's an announcement. Oh, thank God that's over. This project was a struggle, so please, if you did enjoy this video or got some information out of it, please hit that like button down below or comment for the algorithm. If you need a prompt, I got you. What do you plan to do with Heizou? Do you even plan on pulling for him? Do you have a weapon already set up and ready to go? Tell me, home slice. And if you love me and want to be with me forever and ever, hit that subscribe button. That's all I have for you today. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope that your day will be as great as my nap will. Bye bye.